The darkness of space stretched forever in all directions. Admiral Krenth stood on the command deck of his ship, the Eternal Dominion. He was a Viridian, a species with 4 eyes and gray skin. For over 200 years he had served the Galactic Empire. In all that time he had never lost a battle. Today should be easy. His fleet of 200 warships had arrived at a small star system. The locals called it Sol. Intelligence reports said the primitive species here had just discovered how to travel faster than light. The Empire always dealt with such species the same way. Give them a choice. Join the Empire or die. The communications officer spoke up. Her name was Xylera. She reported that several ships were approaching from the inner planets. Krenth looked at the sensor readings. The human ships were small, very small compared to Imperial battleships. Their power output seemed weak. Yet something felt wrong. These humans showed no fear. Every other species always showed fear when they saw the Imperial fleet. The human ships came closer. Krenth could see them now on the viewing screens. They looked strange, sleek and smooth with odd angles. One ship had the name Defiant written on its side in large letters. Another was called Independence. A third bore the name Liberty. A voice came through the communication system. It spoke in a language the computers translated automatically. The voice belonged to a human named Jake Morrison. He was the captain of the Defiant. His greeting was strange. He sounded friendly, almost cheerful. He welcomed the Imperial fleet to human space and asked what they wanted. Krenth delivered the standard message. All human military ships must surrender. All human governments must accept Imperial rule. They had 1 day to comply. If they refused, the Empire would destroy every human world. Captain Morrison thanked him for the message. Then he said no. The humans would not surrender. They would not accept Imperial rule. Then Morrison did something that shocked everyone on the bridge. He laughed. It was not nervous laughter. It was genuine amusement, as if Krenth had told a funny joke. The laughter echoed through the bridge. Officers looked at each other in confusion. No species had ever laughed at an Imperial ultimatum before. When the laughter stopped, Morrison spoke again. He suggested the Imperial fleet should leave. He said humans had a bad history with empires. They did not like being told what to do. Krenth felt anger rising in his chest. In 300 years, no one had spoken to him with such disrespect. He ordered his weapons officer to prepare all guns. He gave Morrison one last warning. Surrender now or face destruction. Morrison sighed. The sound came clearly through the speakers. He told his crew to prepare for battle. The human ships began to move. But they did not move like military vessels. They scattered in a pattern that made no tactical sense. The Defiant and her sister ship spread out in what looked like random positions. Krenth gave the order to fire. Bright beams of energy shot from the Imperial ships. These weapons could destroy entire cities in seconds. The beams raced toward the human vessels at the speed of light. Every gun in the fleet fired at once. The display was beautiful and terrible. The energy hit the human ship's dead center. Officers on the bridge smiled. No ship could survive such an attack. The sensors would soon show nothing but debris. But when the sensors cleared, everyone fell silent. The human ships were still there. All of them. Not one showed any damage. In fact, the Defiant was moving closer to the Imperial fleet. Krenth stared at the display. This was impossible. The tactical officer ran diagnostics. He checked every system twice. The readings were correct. The weapons had hit their targets. But somehow the humans had taken no damage at all. Morrison spoke again. He thanked them for the warning shot. Then he explained that human ships had very good defensive shields. These shields used technology the Empire had never seen before. The energy weapons simply could not get through. A woman's voice joined the conversation. She introduced herself as Linda Hayes, the communications officer on the Defiant. She explained how human shields worked. They bent space itself around the ships. Energy weapons passed through empty space. The ships remained untouched. Her tone suggested she was teaching children a simple lesson. Krenth ordered every ship to fire. If one salvo was not enough, then 200 ships firing together would surely work. Space lit up with weapons fire. Plasma bolts, particle beams, missiles, and lasers all converged on the small human fleet. The barrage continued for a full minute. Enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. When the firing stopped, smoke and debris filled the area. Sensors struggled to see through the mess. Slowly, the view cleared. The human ships sat exactly where they had been. Not one had moved. Not one showed damage. Officers on the bridge began to look worried. Some looked scared. More human voices came through the speakers. They were laughing again. Multiple people this time. They sounded like they were having fun. One voice mentioned that the light show was impressive. Another said it reminded him of fireworks on Earth. Captain Morrison thanked the Imperial fleet for testing the new shield upgrades. He said the data they collected would be very useful. Then he asked if the Empire wanted to talk instead of shoot. He suggested conversation might work better than violence. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Krenth did not know what to do. His weapons were useless. His massive fleet could not harm even one small human ship. The tactical database had no advice for this situation. Every battle plan assumed superior firepower would win. But firepower meant nothing if it could not hit the target. He looked at his officers. They looked back at him with uncertainty in their eyes. Some seemed to be questioning everything they knew about warfare. Others appeared to be in shock. The mighty Imperial fleet had been stopped by a handful of ships from a species that had only recently left their home planet. The human called Alex Carter spoke next. He was a weapons officer on the Defiant. He explained that humans did not want to fight. They preferred to make friends with other species. But if the Empire insisted on violence, the humans could show them something else, something the Admiral would not enjoy. Krenth demanded to know what that meant. Carter explained calmly. Human shields could do more than just protect. They could also project force outward. They could disable enemy weapons without destroying ships. They could shut down entire fleets without killing anyone. To demonstrate, one of the smaller human ships moved forward. It was a frigate called Indomitable. The ship activated something new. A wave of energy spread out from it. The wave hit 10 Imperial battleships. Instantly, all their weapons went offline. The ships were fine. The crews were unharmed, but every gun, every missile launcher, every defense system stopped working. Morrison asked if the Admiral would like to continue fighting, or would he prefer to talk? The choice was his, but Morrison warned that if the shooting continued, more ships would lose their weapons. Eventually, the entire fleet would be helpless. That would be embarrassing to report back to Imperial Command. Krenth made a decision that would change everything. He agreed to talk. He asked Morrison to meet him face to face. Morrison accepted immediately. He gave coordinates for a neutral location between the two fleets. He suggested bringing some food. Humans like to eat during important meetings. As preparations began for the meeting, Krenth felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Not fear of death in battle. That was something every soldier understood. This was fear of the unknown. Fear of a species that could laugh at overwhelming force. Fear of technology that made Imperial might seem primitive. Fear that everything he believed about power and strength might be wrong. 3 hours later, Admiral Krenth found himself on board the human ship Defiant. He had brought his chief security officer and 2 tactical advisors. They walked through corridors that looked nothing like Imperial vessels. The walls were clean and bright. Soft lights gave everything a warm glow. There were no weapons visible anywhere. No guards standing at attention. It felt more like a research station than a warship. Captain Morrison met them at the entrance to what humans called a conference room. He smiled and shook hands with each visitor. The gesture confused the Imperial officers at first. But Morrison explained it was a human way of showing respect and friendship. Krenth awkwardly returned the gesture. The conference room was simple. A large table sat in the center with comfortable chairs around it. Large windows showed the stars outside. On the table were various foods and drinks. Morrison gestured for everyone to sit. He explained that humans believed good conversation happened best with good food. Other human officers were already seated. Commander Linda Hayes sat to Morrison's right. Lieutenant Alex Carter sat to his left. A woman named Rachel Kim was introduced as the chief science officer. A man named Peter Walsh represented the human government. They all greeted the Imperial visitors warmly. Krenth expected demands or threats. Instead, Morrison asked questions. He wanted to know about the Galactic Empire. How old was it? How many species belonged to it? How did it govern so many different worlds? His tone was curious, not hostile. Like a student learning something new. The Admiral explained carefully. The Empire was over 3,000 years old. It controlled more than 5,000 star systems. Hundreds of different species lived under Imperial rule. The Empire maintained order through military strength. Any world that tried to rebel was crushed quickly. This kept the peace throughout the galaxy. Dr. Kim asked about science in the Empire. Did different species share research freely? Did they work together on problems? Krenth admitted that most research focused on military technology. Civilian science was limited. The Empire controlled what knowledge could be shared between worlds. Ambassador Walsh looked sad at this answer. He explained how humans approached things differently. All human research was shared freely. Scientists from different countries worked together. They believed knowledge should belong to everyone. This way, progress happened faster. New discoveries helped all of humanity, not just the military. Krenth struggled to understand this idea. In his experience, knowledge meant power. Sharing it meant giving away advantage. Why would any species do that? Morrison explained with a smile. Humans had learned a hard lesson. They had nearly destroyed themselves fighting over resources and power. Nuclear weapons had brought them to the edge of extinction. The captain described human history, centuries of war between nations, weapons that could kill millions in seconds, a world divided by fear and hatred. Then slowly, humans realized something important. They could either work together or die together. There was no other choice. Commander Hayes continued the story. Humans had made a decision. They would focus on solving problems instead of creating them. They would share resources instead of fighting over them. They would explore space together instead of competing for territory. It was not easy. Many people resisted change. But gradually, human society transformed. The technology that made human ships so powerful came from this cooperation. Scientists around the world worked together on fusion power. The result was nearly unlimited clean energy. Engineers collaborated on new materials. These materials could withstand incredible forces. Physicists shared theories about space and time. These theories led to shields that bent reality itself. Dr. Kim pulled up images on a display screen. She showed beautiful cities on Earth, clean air and water everywhere, gardens growing food using advanced agriculture, hospitals where diseases were cured with ease, schools where children learned without limits. Every human had access to these things, not because they were wealthy or powerful, but because humanity decided everyone deserved a good life. Krenth looked at these images with growing confusion. His tactical advisor, a Krillian named Vex, asked how this was possible. Who enforced the rules? How did they prevent crime and rebellion? Without military control, surely chaos would result, Ambassador Walsh explained patiently. Humans still had laws and police, but the focus was on prevention, not punishment. When people had good education, meaningful work, and comfortable lives, they rarely turned to crime. When conflicts arose, humans tried to understand the root causes. They solved problems instead of just locking people away. Morrison added that humans were not perfect. They still had disagreements and problems, but they faced these challenges together. They talked through differences instead of fighting. They compromised instead of dominating. This approach worked far better than rule through fear. The Admiral asked the question that troubled him most. If humans had such advanced technology, why had they not expanded across the galaxy already? Why had they stayed in their home system for so long? Most species with faster-than-light travel immediately began claiming territory. Morrison laughed again. That friendly, warm laugh that seemed so strange to Imperial ears. He explained that humans had been busy. They had focused on building a sustainable civilization first. They had colonized Mars and several moons in their solar system. They had established space stations and research outposts. They had made sure everyone had enough before expanding further. Lieutenant Carter spoke up. He mentioned that humans had actually developed faster-than-light travel decades ago, but they had chosen to wait. They wanted to understand what they might find in the galaxy. They sent unmanned probes first. These probes discovered the Galactic Empire. They learned about Imperial conquest and subjugation, so humans had prepared. They had developed defensive technology. They had created shields that could stop any weapon. They had built ships that could outrun any pursuer. They had done all this while continuing to improve life for their people. When they finally sent crewed ships into deep space, they were ready for anything. Commander Hayes pulled up more data. She showed sensor readings of the entire Imperial fleet, ship classes, weapon systems, shield frequencies, reactor outputs, everything. The humans had been watching and learning for years. They knew exactly what the Empire was capable of. That was why Morrison had laughed at the ultimatum. The Empire never had a chance. Krenth felt cold inside. His entire fleet had been studied like insects under glass. Every weakness had been catalogued. Every strategy had been anticipated. The humans could have destroyed the fleet at any time, but they had chosen not to. They had disabled some weapons as a demonstration, a gentle warning. They were showing mercy to an enemy that had come to conquer them. Dr. Kim spoke softly. She said humans had monitored Imperial communications. They knew about rebellions in Imperial space, worlds that tried to break free and were crushed, species that had resisted and been nearly destroyed. Humans had records of Imperial atrocities going back centuries. They knew exactly what kind of empire they faced. But, she continued, they also knew that most beings in the Empire were not evil. Most soldiers followed orders without understanding alternatives. Most citizens lived in fear and had no choice. The Empire was a system, not a people. Systems could change. Morrison leaned forward. He looked directly at Krenth. He asked a simple question. What did the Admiral really want? Not what his orders said. Not what Imperial doctrine required. What did he personally want for the future of the galaxy? The question struck Krenth deeply. In 300 years of military service, no one had ever asked him that. He had always followed orders. He had always done his duty. He had never questioned whether that duty served any greater good. He looked at the images of human cities still displayed on the screen. Clean, peaceful, prosperous. He thought about the conquered worlds in Imperial space, strip-mined, heavily policed, living in fear. Ambassador Walsh made an offer. Humans would share their technology with anyone who chose peace. Medical advances that could save billions of lives. Clean energy that could power entire civilizations. Agricultural techniques that could end hunger. Education methods that could unlock potential in every child. All of this was available. Not through conquest or submission. Through friendship and cooperation. The Admiral could return to Imperial space with this message. Or he could report that humans were an enemy to be destroyed. The choice was his. But Morrison warned that if the Empire chose war, humans would defend themselves and others. They would stand against Imperial expansion. They would protect any species that wanted freedom. Krenth sat in silence for a long time. His advisors looked at him nervously. Finally, he spoke. He asked for time to think. Morrison agreed immediately. The Admiral and his officers could stay on the Defiant as long as needed. They could tour the ship, meet the crew, see how humans really lived. Then they could make an informed decision. As the meeting ended, Morrison stood and extended his hand again. This time, Krenth took it without hesitation. Something had changed in the Admiral. He had come expecting to enforce Imperial will. Instead, he had found people who challenged everything he believed. People who offered hope instead of fear. People who laughed in the face of impossible odds because they knew they had. Admiral Krenth spent 2 days aboard the Defiant. He toured every section of the ship. He spoke with crew members at every level. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about military operations. The engineering deck amazed him most. A young engineer named Sophie Clark showed him the reactor systems. The power output was incredible. 10 times what Imperial ships produced with reactors half the size. Clark explained the principles simply. Humans had mastered fusion at the molecular level. They could extract energy with almost perfect efficiency. There was no waste, no danger of overload. More surprising was how the crew interacted. There was no rigid hierarchy. Officers and enlisted personnel worked side by side. They shared jokes and stories. They helped each other with tasks. When Krenth asked about discipline, Clark laughed. She explained that humans worked together because they wanted to. Everyone understood their role. Everyone took pride in doing it well. Fear was not needed. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Grant demonstrated human healthcare. She showed him equipment that could heal broken bones in hours. Devices that could cure diseases with a single treatment. Medicine that could regenerate damaged organs. Grant explained that every human had access to this level of care. Not just military personnel. Everyone. From birth until death, healthcare was free and unlimited. Krenth mentioned that such care must be very expensive. Who paid for it? Grant looked confused by the question. She explained that humans had moved beyond traditional economics. Automation and unlimited energy meant producing goods cost almost nothing. Basic needs like food, shelter, and healthcare were simply provided. People worked because they found meaning in it, not because they needed money to survive. The Admiral's tactical advisor, Vex, had spent time studying human weapons systems. What he learned troubled him. Human weapons were actually defensive tools that could be reconfigured. The same systems that projected shields could generate force fields to contain threats. The same sensors that tracked enemies could monitor environmental hazards. Everything had multiple peaceful applications. Lieutenant Carter had taken Vex to the Weapons Control Center. There, the Krillian officer saw something that shocked him. A small device no bigger than his hand controlled all the ship's offensive capabilities. Carter explained that human warships were designed primarily for exploration and defense. Weapons were an unfortunate necessity, not the main purpose. On the third day, Captain Morrison invited Krenth to the observation deck. They sat looking at the stars together. The Imperial fleet hung in space beyond, still frozen by disabled weapons systems. Morrison offered to restore those weapons. He said he trusted Krenth to make the right choice. Krenth admitted he was conflicted. Everything he had learned went against his training. The Empire taught that order required force. That peace came through strength. That freedom was dangerous. But human society proved all these ideas wrong. Humans had both freedom and order. They had peace without oppression. They had strength but used it for protection, not conquest. Morrison understood the struggle. He mentioned that humans had gone through the same process. They had believed in might making right. They had built empires and conquered weaker nations. But eventually they realized this path led nowhere good. It created cycles of revenge and suffering that never ended. Breaking those cycles required courage. The courage to try something different. The Admiral asked what would happen if he returned to Imperial space with a message of cooperation. Supreme Command would likely consider him a traitor. He might be executed. His family could suffer consequences. Was human friendship worth such risks? Morrison became serious. He could not promise safety. Change was always dangerous. But he could promise that humans would support anyone who chose peace. They would defend those who stood against tyranny. They would share knowledge with those willing to learn. And they would remember friends who took brave stands. Ambassador Walsh joined them on the observation deck. He carried data tablets containing information about human technology. Complete specifications, full technical documents, nothing held back. He offered these to Krenth freely. The Admiral could take them back to Imperial space. He could share them with anyone he chose. Knowledge should be free, Walsh insisted, even to those who came as enemies. Krenth stared at the tablets. This information was worth more than entire star systems. Imperial scientists would need centuries to develop such technology on their own. Yet humans simply gave it away. No conditions. No demands for loyalty. Just an offer of friendship and hope for a better future. Dr. Kim arrived with news. She had been monitoring Imperial communications. Supreme Command had ordered additional fleets to the human system. 5 more armadas were approaching. Over 1,000 ships in total. The Empire planned to overwhelm humanity with sheer numbers. Morrison sighed but did not seem worried. He mentioned that humans had expected this response. Imperial thinking was predictable. When something did not work, they simply tried using more force. It never occurred to them that force itself might be the problem. Krenth felt panic rising. 1,000 ships could destroy entire solar systems. Even human technology might not withstand such an assault. But Carter shook his head. He explained that humans had tested their shields against far worse. Their home star produced solar flares that carried more energy than 1,000 warships. Human defensive systems were designed to handle threats from nature itself. Military weapons were nothing in comparison. The Admiral asked what humans planned to do. Morrison said they would do exactly what they did before. They would give the new fleet a chance to talk. They would demonstrate that violence was futile. They would offer friendship to anyone willing to accept it. And if necessary, they would protect themselves without causing unnecessary harm. Commander Hayes suggested something bold. She proposed that Krenth remain with the human fleet when the new armada arrived. He could see how humans handled overwhelming force. He could witness their methods firsthand. Then he could make an informed report to Imperial Command. Truth would serve better than propaganda. Krenth agreed. He sent a message to his fleet informing them of his decision. Some officers supported him. Others questioned his judgment. A few called him a traitor. But the Admiral had made his choice. He would see this through to whatever end came. 2 weeks later, The massive Imperial Armada arrived. 1,200 warships assembled in formation. The sight was magnificent and terrible. Enough firepower to reduce planets to dust. The commander was Supreme Admiral Thrall himself. He had come personally to teach humanity a lesson. Thrall's message was short and brutal. The humans would surrender immediately. No negotiations, no discussions. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of every human world. He gave them 1 hour to comply. Captain Morrison responded with his usual calm humor. He thanked Thrall for the visit. He mentioned that humans enjoyed meeting new people. He invited the Supreme Admiral aboard for refreshments and conversation. The invitation was declined with profanity. When the hour expired, Thrall gave the order to fire. The entire armada opened up at once. Space itself seemed to tear apart. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, plasma torpedoes, every type of weapon the Empire possessed fired simultaneously. The barrage was so intense that sensors could barely function. Krenth watched from the bridge of the Defiant. He had seen the weapons demonstrations before. But this was different. This was the full might of the Galactic Empire. Surely no defense could withstand such power. The assault continued for 3 full minutes, long enough to vaporize a small moon. When it finally stopped, debris and radiation filled the space where the human fleet had been. Thrall declared victory. The human threat was ended. The Empire remained supreme. Then the sensors cleared. The human ships were exactly where they had been. Not one showed damage. Not one had even moved. Commander Hayes activated the external speakers. She thanked the Imperial fleet for the weapons test. The data would be very useful for future shield improvements. Lieutenant Carter added that humans had recorded everything. They now had complete data on Imperial weapons capabilities. This would help them design even better defenses. He sounded genuinely grateful. Then Captain Morrison made an announcement. It was broadcast on all frequencies. Every ship in the Imperial Armada would receive it. Every crew member would hear it directly. The message bypassed command channels completely. Morrison spoke to the thousands of individuals serving in the Imperial fleet. He asked them simple questions. Why were they here? What did they hope to gain? What better future did conquest promise? He did not speak as an enemy. He spoke as someone who understood their situation, someone who offered an alternative. Admiral Krenth listened to Morrison's words. He watched the reactions of the Defiant crew. They did not gloat over their technological superiority. They did not mock the Imperial forces. Instead, they looked sad. Sad that so many beings lived under a system that gave them no choice but violence. Sad that the galaxy had accepted tyranny as normal for so long. But also hopeful. Hopeful that things could change. Morrison's message reached every corner of the massive Imperial fleet. Thousands of crew members heard his words directly. He spoke about human history, about wars that nearly destroyed their world, about the choice to build instead of conquer, about the possibility of a better future for all species. Ambassador Walsh continued the broadcast. He described human society in detail, how people lived without fear, how children grew up with unlimited opportunity, how different cultures thrived together, how science and art flourished when freed from military control. He painted a picture of what civilization could be. Dr. Kim shared technical information. She explained how human technology could improve lives throughout the galaxy. Clean energy for every world, medicine to cure terrible diseases, food production methods to end hunger. All of this was available for free. Humans only asked for one thing in return: friendship and peace. Supreme Admiral Thrall tried to block the transmission. His communication officers worked frantically to jam the signal. They failed. Human technology was too advanced. The message continued without interruption. More concerning, crew members throughout the fleet began talking to each other, discussing what they heard, questioning their orders. Thrall ordered his officers to arrest anyone who spoke favorably about the human message. But the orders were impossible to enforce. Too many crew members were talking. Too many were questioning. Some officers quietly agreed with what the humans said. The rigid discipline of the Imperial fleet began to crack. On one battleship, a young engineering officer named Kelvin stopped his work. He spoke to his commander. He asked why they were really here. What did conquering humans accomplish? How did it make life better for anyone in the Empire? His commander had no good answers. Other crew members joined the conversation. Soon, the entire engineering section was debating Imperial policy. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of ships. Medical officers questioned orders to prepare for mass casualties. Weapons officers wondered why they were attacking people who offered only peace. Even security personnel began to doubt the righteousness of their cause. Admiral Krenth watched this unfold from the Defiant. He saw the Imperial fleet falling into disarray. Not from external attack, not from sabotage or weapons, simply from being exposed to the truth. The Empire had always controlled information carefully. They told people what to think. They never allowed questions. Now, for the first time, thousands of Imperial personnel were thinking for themselves. Captain Morrison ended his broadcast with an invitation. Any ship that wanted to talk was welcome to join him. Any crew that wanted to learn about alternatives could visit human vessels. Any individual who questioned Imperial doctrine would find understanding and support. The choice was theirs. Supreme Admiral Thrall responded with rage. He ordered the fleet to fire again. He demanded total obedience. He threatened to execute anyone who hesitated. Some ships obeyed. Others did not. The second barrage was less than half as strong as the first. Many vessels simply did not fire. The human shields held easily. Morrison thanked those who fired for providing more test data. Then he did something unexpected. Small human ships launched from carriers. They were not fighters or bombers. They were shuttles. Unarmed transport vessels. These shuttles approached the Imperial fleet. They broadcast a simple message. Anyone who wanted to visit human ships was welcome. Come as guests, not prisoners. See how humans really lived. Talk with people who chose cooperation over conquest. Then make informed decisions about the future. Thrall ordered his ships to destroy the shuttles. Some obeyed. Their weapons hit the small craft dead on. The shuttles absorbed the damage without effect. Their shields were just as strong as the warships they came from. The rest of the fleet did nothing. They watched the shuttles approach and did not fire. The first Imperial crew members to accept the invitation came from a cruiser called Star of Victory. 20 officers and enlisted personnel boarded a human shuttle. They expected to be taken prisoner. Instead, they were greeted warmly and offered food and drink. Over the next several hours, more Imperial personnel made the journey. Hundreds then thousands. They toured human ships. They met crew members who treated them with respect and kindness. They saw technology that could improve their lives dramatically. They learned about societies where people lived well without constant fear. A Krillian tactical officer named Pax found himself talking with a human engineer named Sophie Clark. She showed him the reactor systems, explained the principles clearly, answered every question patiently. When Pax asked why she would share such secrets with an enemy, Sophie looked confused. She said knowledge was meant to be shared. The more people understood, the faster everyone progressed. Pax realized something profound. Humans genuinely believed in cooperation. It was not a trick or strategy. It was how they approached everything. They saw other beings not as threats or resources, but as potential friends and partners. This worldview was completely alien to Imperial thinking, yet it clearly worked. Back in the Imperial fleet, Supreme Admiral Thrall faced a crisis. His command structure was breaking down. Officers were refusing orders. Entire crews were requesting permission to visit human ships. Some vessels had stopped responding to his signals altogether. The mighty armada that had come to crush humanity was falling apart from within. Thrall contacted Imperial headquarters. He demanded reinforcements and authorization to use extreme measures. The response shocked him. Central Command ordered him to stand down. They had received reports from Admiral Krenth describing human capabilities. Fighting was futile. Negotiation was the only option. The Supreme Admiral refused. He had built his career on strength and domination. He could not accept that a species barely off their home world could challenge the Empire. He ordered his personal guard to arrest officers who questioned him. He prepared to fire on his own ships if necessary to maintain control, but his crew had heard Morrison's message. They had seen their weapons fail against human shields. They had watched thousands of their comrades visit human ships and return changed. They knew the truth. The Empire's way was not the only way. Better alternatives existed. Thrall's own security chief, a veteran officer named Dax, confronted him on the bridge. He asked the Supreme Admiral to reconsider, to at least talk with the humans before continuing this pointless conflict. Thrall responded by pulling a weapon and threatening to shoot anyone who defied him. The bridge crew moved quickly. They disarmed Thrall and placed him under arrest. It was mutiny by the technical definition, but it was also the right thing to do. They contacted the Defiant and requested asylum for their admiral. They asked to negotiate on behalf of their fleet. Captain Morrison agreed immediately. He invited representatives from every ship in the Armada to join a conference, not a surrender negotiation, a discussion between equals about building a better future. Within hours, hundreds of officers arrived on human vessels. Admiral Krenth found himself leading these discussions. The officers looked to him for guidance. He had spent time with humans. He understood their perspective. He could explain things in terms Imperial personnel would understand. He had become a bridge between two very different civilizations. The conversations lasted for days. Imperial officers asked thousands of questions. Humans answered patiently and completely. They shared everything: technology specifications, social structures, educational methods, medical advances. Nothing was held back. The principle of free knowledge exchange was absolute. Gradually, a plan emerged. The Imperial fleet would return home carrying a message. They would share what they learned. They would advocate for change from within. Humans would support this effort however they could. They would defend anyone who chose peace over conquest. They would prove that alternatives to empire were possible. Not everyone agreed with this plan. Some officers remained loyal to traditional Imperial values. They saw human openness as weakness they believed might still made right. These officers were allowed to leave freely. Humans did not force anyone to change. They simply offered alternatives and let people choose. But the majority chose to support the new approach. They had seen too much to go back to blind obedience. They understood that the empire had failed them. That 3,000 years of conquest had created only suffering and fear. That humanity offered something better, a future where all species could thrive together. As the conference concluded, Ambassador Walsh made a formal announcement. Humanity was establishing diplomatic relations with any Imperial personnel who chose cooperation. They would share technology with any world that wanted it. They would defend any species that sought freedom. The age of unchallenged Imperial dominance was over. Admiral Krenth stood with Captain Morrison looking at the assembled fleets. Imperial and human ships now mixed together peacefully. Crew members moved freely between vessels, former enemies becoming friends. It was a sight no one had imagined possible just weeks earlier. Morrison asked Krenth what he thought would happen next. The Admiral admitted he did not know. Change on this scale had never occurred in galactic history. But he was hopeful. For the first time in his long life, he believed a better future was possible. Not through conquest and domination, through cooperation and friendship. The human captain smiled. That warm, genuine smile. The Imperial fleet prepared to return home. But everything had changed. Ships that came as conquerors were leaving as ambassadors. Crews that arrived ready for battle were departing with hope for peace. The transformation was remarkable and complete. Before departure, humans provided each ship with complete technical documentation. Reactor designs, shield systems, medical technology, agricultural methods, everything. Admiral Krenth asked Captain Morrison if he was not worried about sharing such powerful knowledge. What if the Empire used it to build better weapons? Morrison laughed. That same laugh that had so confused Imperial officers weeks earlier. He explained that human shields could stop anything the Empire built. Besides, he added, once people saw how technology could improve their lives, they would not want to use it for war. Clean energy made weapons obsolete. Abundant resources eliminated reasons for conflict. Dr. Kim gave a final presentation to all departing crews. She showed them how to build basic fusion reactors using materials available on almost any industrial world. Within months, any planet could have unlimited clean power. This alone would transform Imperial society. Energy scarcity had always justified military control. That justification was about to disappear. Commander Hayes organized exchange programs. Young officers from Imperial ships would spend time training with human crews. They would learn not just technology but philosophy, how to think about problems differently, how to value cooperation over domination. These officers would return home as seeds of change. Lieutenant Carter volunteered to travel with the Imperial fleet. Along with several other human officers, he would provide technical support as ships implemented new systems. More importantly, he would continue teaching Imperial personnel about human values. Change required more than new machines. It required new ways of thinking, The day of departure arrived. Admiral Krenth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. His ship now carried fusion reactors designed by humans. His crew had learned to operate defensive shields that made them nearly invincible. But the real change was not in technology. It was in hearts and minds. Morrison contacted him one final time before the fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel. He reminded Krenth that humans would be watching. If Imperial forces tried to suppress the message of peace, human ships would intervene. They would protect those who chose cooperation. They would defend the right of all beings to live without fear. But Morrison also expressed confidence. He believed most Imperial citizens, when given the choice, would choose peace. They would embrace alternatives to constant military control. The Empire would transform not through conquest, but through the free choice of its own people. The fleet jumped. 1,200 ships vanished into faster-than-light travel. They would arrive in Imperial space in 3 weeks. What happened then would determine the future of the galaxy. News of the fleet's encounter with humanity spread quickly. Imperial Command tried to suppress information. They declared all reports classified. They threatened crew members who spoke about what they had seen. But the truth could not be contained. Too many people knew. Too many wanted to share what they had learned. On worlds throughout Imperial space, people began asking questions. If humans could build such advanced technology through cooperation, why did the Empire require military domination? If other species could thrive without constant war, why did Imperial citizens live in fear? If alternatives existed, why were they never allowed to try them? Some planetary governors tried to implement human technology. They built fusion reactors following the provided plans. The results were dramatic. Power became abundant and cheap. Industries flourished. Living standards improved rapidly. Citizens who had struggled their entire lives suddenly had comfort and security. Imperial Central Command watched with growing alarm. Planets that gained energy independence questioned why they needed Imperial oversight. Populations with improved living standards demanded more freedom. The iron grip that had held the Empire together for 3,000 years was loosening. They dispatched fleets to restore order, to remind rebellious worlds of Imperial power. But many of these fleets had officers who had visited human space. Crew members who knew about alternatives. When ordered to attack civilian populations, some refused. They could not unsee what they had learned. They could not return to blind obedience. Human ships began appearing throughout Imperial space, not invading, not attacking, simply observing and offering help. When natural disasters struck, humans provided aid. When diseases broke out, humans shared medicine. When conflicts arose, humans mediated. They demonstrated through actions what they had promised with words. More systems declared independence from Imperial control. They formed cooperative alliances with human guidance. They implemented technologies that eliminated scarcity. They created societies where all citizens had voice and opportunity. The example spread like fire across dry grass. Admiral Krenth found himself at the center of this transformation. He traveled from world to world, sharing his experiences with humanity. He explained how human society worked. He taught the principles of cooperation and mutual benefit. Everywhere he went, people listened eagerly. They were hungry for alternatives to endless war and fear. The Empire's leadership faced an impossible choice. They could try to suppress the revolution through force, but many of their own military forces now sympathized with reform. They could continue as before and watch their empire crumble from within. Or they could negotiate and try to transform peacefully. After months of internal debate, they chose negotiation. Representatives from Imperial Central Command traveled to human space. They came not with ultimatums but with questions. How could such a transformation be managed? How could order be maintained without military force? How could 3,000 years of tradition be changed without chaos? Ambassador Walsh led the human delegation. He was joined by reformed Imperial officers, including Admiral Krenth. Together, they crafted what became known as the Galactic Cooperation Charter. It outlined principles for voluntary association between worlds. It established mechanisms for sharing resources and technology. It protected the rights of all species to self-determination. Most importantly, the Charter recognized that strength came through cooperation, not domination. That prosperity required freedom, not control. That peace was built on mutual respect, not fear. These ideas were revolutionary. They challenged everything the Empire had believed for millennia. The charter was presented to all member worlds of the former empire. Each could choose to join the new cooperative framework or maintain independence. Most chose to join. They had seen the benefits of human technology. They had heard stories about societies without fear. They wanted to be part of building something better. The transformation was not instant or complete. Some worlds clung to old ways. Some leaders refused to give up power. Conflicts arose over implementation details. Change always brought challenges. But the direction was clear. The galaxy was evolving from an empire based on force to a confederation based on choice. 5 years after the initial encounter, Captain Morrison returned to the location where he had first met Admiral Krenth. The Defiant now served as part of a joint human-alien exploration fleet. Krenth commanded the scientific survey ship Discovery. They were exploring regions of space never visited before. They met for dinner aboard the Defiant. Old friends now, comfortable in each other's presence. They discussed current projects and future plans. The conversation was easy, filled with mutual respect and genuine affection. Krenth mentioned that he still thought about that first meeting. When Morrison had laughed at the Imperial ultimatum, he asked what had been so funny. The question had always puzzled him. Morrison smiled. He explained that humans laughed not from mockery but from perspective. They had faced their own extinction and survived. They had learned that the most serious situations sometimes called for humor. Laughter was a way of saying that hope existed even in darkness, that solutions could be found to impossible problems, that fear and threats were not the only tools for dealing with conflict. When the Imperial fleet had arrived expecting easy conquest, humans had seen an opportunity. Not for war, but for connection. Not for destruction, but for teaching. The laughter had been genuine joy at the possibility of making new friends. Even friends who came as enemies, Krenth understood now. He found himself laughing too, not nervous or uncertain, but with genuine happiness. He had spent 300 years serving an empire built on fear. Now he helped build a civilization based on hope. The transformation had been difficult and dangerous, but completely worth it. Throughout the reformed galaxy, millions of beings were learning the same lesson, that cooperation produced better results than competition. That sharing knowledge helped everyone advance faster, that different species could thrive together. That laughter in the face of impossible odds was sometimes the most powerful weapon of all. The galaxy had trembled when humans revealed their power. It trembled again as human philosophy spread throughout civilized space. But the trembling was not from fear anymore. It was from excitement, from hope, from the realization that a better future was not just possible but already beginning. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors, but as friends. They had 10 years after the first contact, the galaxy looked completely different. The old Galactic Empire had dissolved peacefully. In its place stood the Galactic Cooperative, a voluntary association of thousands of worlds working together for mutual benefit. Human technology had spread throughout civilized space. Every member world now had access to fusion power. Energy was abundant and free. This single change had transformed everything. Industries flourished. Cities grew. Living standards rose dramatically. Problems that had seemed unsolvable for centuries disappeared almost overnight. Medical advances followed close behind. Diseases that once killed millions were now easily cured. Injuries that used to cripple could be healed completely. Life expectancy doubled across most species. Population health improved in ways that previous generations could not have imagined. Agricultural technology ended hunger. New growing methods produced abundant food with minimal resources. Desert worlds bloomed. Ice planets became habitable. Every inhabited system could feed its population easily. The ancient struggle for survival had finally ended. But the biggest change was not technological. It was cultural. Species that had been enemies for generations now worked together. Scientists collaborated across stellar distances. Artists shared their work freely. Teachers exchanged methods and ideas. A true galactic civilization was emerging, built on cooperation rather than conquest. Ambassador Walsh, now retired from official duties, spent his time traveling the galaxy. He visited schools where children of different species learned together. He attended festivals celebrating the diversity of galactic culture. He witnessed firsthand the society that humans and their allies had built. On a world called New Harmony, he met with a group of young people. They were mixed species. Humans, Viridians, Krillians, and dozens of others. They had grown up in the new galaxy. They could barely imagine the old empire. To them, cooperation was normal. War was something from history books. A young Viridian student asked Walsh a question. She wanted to know if humans had been afraid when the Imperial fleet first arrived. Walsh smiled. He admitted that some fear existed. But mostly, humans had been excited. They saw the encounter as an opportunity to make friends and share what they had learned. The student found this hard to believe. An empire of thousands of worlds against a single species barely off their home planet. How could humans not be terrified? Walsh explained that fear came from feeling helpless. Humans had never felt helpless. They had technology to protect themselves. More importantly, they had confidence in their values. They knew cooperation was stronger than conquest. Dr. Kim continued her research, now assisted by scientists from hundreds of species. Together, they pushed the boundaries of knowledge in ways no single species could achieve alone. Their latest project involved understanding the fundamental nature of consciousness. How did different species think? Could they share thoughts directly? What possibilities existed for deeper connection? The research was progressing well. Different perspectives brought unique insights. Viridians with their 4 eyes perceived light differently. Krillians with their crystalline brains processed information in fascinating ways. Humans with their emotional depth added another dimension. Together, they were discovering things none could learn alone. Commander Hayes had become an admiral herself. She commanded a fleet of exploration vessels discovering new regions of space. Her crew was mixed species. Her chief engineer was Krillian. Her medical officer was Viridian. Her tactical officer was from a species that had joined the cooperative just 2 years earlier. They worked together seamlessly. Cultural differences were celebrated, not suppressed. When conflicts arose, they talked through solutions. When challenges appeared, they faced them as a team. The bridge of her flagship looked like a vision of what the galaxy could become. Different beings united by common purpose. Lieutenant Carter, promoted to captain after years of service, commanded a training vessel. He taught young officers from across the galaxy. His lessons focused not just on technical skills but on philosophy. How to think about problems, how to value different perspectives, how to lead through inspiration rather than intimidation. His students adored him. He made learning fun. He encouraged questions. He admitted when he did not know answers. He treated everyone with respect regardless of species or background. He embodied the principles that humanity had brought to the galaxy. Admiral Krenth had reached the end of his long life. Viridians lived longer than humans, and Krenth had served for over 400 years. He spent his final days on Earth, visiting the world that had changed the galaxy. Humans welcomed him warmly. They gave him honors usually reserved for their greatest heroes. Captain Morrison, now an admiral himself, visited Krenth every day. They talked about old times, about that first meeting when everything changed, about the journey from enemies to friends, about the galaxy they had helped build together. Krenth told Morrison something he had never shared before. In those early days when the Imperial fleet first encountered humans, he had been ready to die fighting. Death in battle seemed preferable to the shame of failure, but humans had given him something better than victory or death. They had given him purpose. For 300 years he had served an empire built on fear. He had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions. He had done terrible things in the name of order. He thought this was what strength meant, what duty required. Then humans showed him a different kind of strength, the strength to build rather than destroy, to create rather than conquer, to hope rather than fear. The last century of his life had been the most meaningful. He had helped transform the galaxy. He had seen species thrive in freedom. He had watched children grow up without knowing war. He had lived to see the better future that humans had promised. Morrison thanked his friend. He said that humans had learned as much from the galaxy as they had taught. Meeting different species had expanded human understanding. Working with others had made humanity better. The transformation had gone both ways. When Krenth died, beings from across the galaxy attended his memorial. Millions watched via broadcasts. He was remembered not as a conqueror but as a bridge, someone who had the courage to change, who admitted his mistakes and worked to make them right, who showed that redemption was always possible. The Galactic Cooperative continued to grow. New species joined regularly. Some were discovered by exploration fleets. Others heard about the cooperative and sought membership. All were welcomed if they embraced the principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Not every world chose to join. Some preferred isolation, others maintained their own systems of government. The cooperative respected these choices. Freedom meant allowing people to choose their own path. As long as they did not harm others, every society could develop as they wished. Military forces still existed but served different purposes. Defense fleets protected member worlds from natural disasters and space hazards. Rapid response teams provided emergency aid. Peacekeeping forces mediated disputes. The focus was on helping, not hurting. Occasionally, conflicts arose. Old habits died hard. Some beings still believed in domination over cooperation. These situations were handled carefully. Force was always the last resort. Dialogue came first. Understanding before action. Most conflicts could be resolved through patient conversation and addressing root causes. The cooperative had one strict rule. No species could force their will on another. If someone tried conquest or subjugation, the full strength of the cooperative responded. Not to punish but to protect, to demonstrate that aggression would not succeed. That cooperation was not weakness but strength. Admiral Morrison, in his later years, was asked to write about the first contact. About the day humans met the Galactic Empire. His account became required reading in schools across the galaxy. Young people studied it to understand how change happened, how courage and humor and hope could transform the universe. He ended his account with a simple observation. The Empire had arrived expecting humans to tremble in fear. Instead, humans had laughed. That laughter contained everything that made humanity special. Joy in the face of danger, confidence in better solutions, belief that even enemies could become friends. The laughter had echoed across the galaxy. It still echoed. Every time someone chose cooperation over conflict. Every time a problem was solved through talking rather than fighting. Every time beings from different worlds worked together toward common goals. The laughter continued. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it, not through weapons or threats, through example and generosity, through showing that alternatives existed, through proving that kindness was stronger than cruelty. That hope was more powerful than fear. That laughter in the face of impossible odds was the most revolutionary act of all. The galaxy that trembled before humans now danced. Different species moving together in harmony, creating beauty and knowledge and joy, building a civilization that honored all life, spreading throughout the stars with messages of peace rather than conquest. And whenever someone felt afraid or uncertain about the future, they remembered the story. The story of a small human fleet that faced an enormous empire and chose to laugh. The story of beings who believed in something better and made it real. The story of how the galaxy learned,